I'd been involved in tree planting for 5 or so years before I actually got into any sort of ecosystem design. Forestry, as we know it, the title forestry is not necessarily forestry. It's not a forest. These are plantations. Therefore, often monocultures and not necessarily the most healthy ecosystems whatsoever. So fortunately, when I came to Portugal, I heard of a permaculture course that was very holistic in its teachings. And the main thing that really drew me and made me feel most alive was the agroforestry systems that we were learning about. There was a long-term vision involved in this, and I felt a lot more called to be involved in designing forestry systems rather than just gardens. I feel like I've always had a relationship with trees. I'd been climbing trees and building tree houses and hanging out in forests since I was super young. And so there was a natural gravitation towards designing forests and having some sort of relationship that also I could pass down to further generations, that spoke to me more than just gardens, more than just perennial plants, or maybe short-lived plants. This is, I guess, an intergenerational approach to land management that made a lot more sense, and created a lot more stability, not just for humans, but for biodiversity as a whole, to recreate environments that would give homes and ecosystems and also a lot more climate resilience for the future. First of all, as a thread throughout these questions, I'd like to break down into 3 main approaches. The first of all, environmental science. Second, biodiversity impact. And the third is social impact. So that can be in community. That does not have to be in an intentional community where we all live on some land together and people have dreadlocks. This is simply a shared space of land where people commune. I think my first experience of a effective agroforestry food system was during my permaculture course. As I mentioned, we were in Granada in the south of Spain, which is very dry and arid in the mountains, and a lot of this landscape is does not look fertile at all, and a lot of energy has to go into maintaining these landscapes. However, we got brought to a friend's farm, and they simply had a plot dug out that was, there were inputs of soil. However, they just planted trees, and this was something that had only been growing for, I think, 2.5 years. And by this point, the trees were already above our heads, and there was possibly around 100 species of trees in 100 square meter plot. So not much at all. And this garden, so to speak, not your traditional garden that you would imagine, but it is a garden, was thriving. It was stratified very well. By stratification or stratified, I mean layers of plants. We have our canopy. This is your medium height productive trees that are going to live quite a bit longer. These could be mango trees, citrus trees, somewhere between 10 and 20 years of production. You have your emergent layer, the taller trees. These are the pioneers, but also potentially the ones that are going to live the longest. So native hardwoods, pines, for example, or oaks, or olive trees are a really great example. Olive trees can live up to 3,000-4,000 years old. So they would be your trees that are longest in the vision, and also the ones that take the most patience to grow, starting off very slowly. Then you would have your understory of shrubs and fruit trees that are much smaller fruits. These could be peaches, sometimes apples, and then your shrubs, we could have like nut trees, almonds, cashews in tropical climates. From there, we're going down to the herbaceous layer, the ground crops, perennial vegetables, beans. And again, now we're coming back to the idea of a garden, right? From there, we'd have ground cover protecting the soil. These can be clovers, peas, and different living vegetables that are easy to forage. You can just run out from the kitchen, grab some. And finally, there would be climbers and vines, which are in every healthy forest system. So ivy, passion fruit, kiwis, to name a few. Okay, so this forest system that I got to visit was 2.5 years old and super, super healthy. Not much water going into it, in the middle of something you might call a desert. And I was amazingly inspired. Almost immediately after that, I felt this is where I want it to go in the permaculture journey. So I have worked with gardens, but I feel a lot more alive working with agroforestry systems. To mention a few others, Temera is an amazing example. Also in traditional Dream Factory here, we do have an amazing agroforestry system. There's a huge diversity of plants. You can see that there's various layers of trees and bushes that are interacting and have various roles within the ecosystem. Some are for, literally, they are there to grow fast and to be chopped and dropped. It's providing organic material. It's also providing a lot of shade in the hot months. So actually the biggest trees you see here, the ones that are very sprawling, potentially they have beans coming out of them. These are Tagazastes. These are our #1 chop and drop species. Then we have poplars, who are the emergent species, growing very tall. Again, a chop and drop species, but also super, super generous with what they can give in terms of the leaves they drop, also in terms of what we can take off of them when we prune them. And all around the land, we've just essentially cut their lower branches in the midwinter, and literally stuck them in the ground, and they've taken. So they're amazing givers, and it's so right here you can see that this is not only that we recycle right into the food forest, but it's something that gives to the land around it itself. There are also several species of pine in here, as well as casuarinas, who are emergent trees. These are for giving homes to the animals and the plants all around their lower roots. Okay, so within agroforestry, we have the idea of succession. Actually, within designing ecosystems in general, we work with the idea of succession. So most of the trees that I have mentioned just now previously are designed to, they are pioneers, and they're designed to be fodder eventually, something that once the longer term species and once the fruit trees are in a really stable condition, they will be cut back. They can be used as wood chips. They can be used as essentially any sort of organic material that's going to provide a lot of nutrient for the environment around it. So in a healthy food forest, within a healthy forest, we have a mix of soil fertility. We have very healthy microorganisms and an interaction with mycelium and the rootstocks of trees and the rootstocks of plants that are all talking and informing each other on what nutrients need to be cycled. So amazingly, this also absorbs the need for chemical inputs. We have a microclimate regulation. We have a water retention cycle. Therefore, again, something that is self-sustaining, something that is resilient, and something that, as it gets more mature, it needs less human interaction. And therefore the humans can focus on other things like smaller garden production, annual crop production, and tending to maybe creating new forests somewhere else. You know, this is something that can be replicated. There's a lot of answers to this, and each one can go very, very deep. But yeah, let's try and answer it using the three things that we were looking at before. We are focusing on creating soil health. Again, what we're doing within the traditional Dream Factory forest, which is between 3.5 and 2 years old, as there were different parts planted in different times. We are focusing on building soil health. This is the first thing. So this is why you see a lot of pioneer trees, more common than fruit trees, because we're creating a lot of, we're building a lot of soil through creating organic material. Coming back to diversity being stability, when we have a mix of stratified plants, we are creating a system where there's a lot of nutrient cycling being digested through plants who provide different nutrients to the soil, as well as maybe attracting different species of animals to interact with them, therefore creating a lot more interaction. Also a lot more natural composting, even coming down to cycles of life and death. When we're looking at monocultures, there is a serious lack of this. There's not necessarily the ecosystems created for other animals and plants to interact with the soil. We're also, as humanity and as the industry is in traditional farming, there's a lot of chemical input which kills biodiversity both above ground and below ground. So when we're clear cutting, plowing the soil, tilling the soil, and when we're harvesting our crops traditionally, we are really creating a lot of exposure to the elements, as well as taking away the food for mycelium and microorganisms to live on, as well as being exposed to bare sun. Also in like floods where we have runoff, then there's not a stable system for microorganisms and mycelium to depend on. Whereas an agroforestry system, or a well-designed forest in general, has the stability that is permanent, is there, but is always providing a life cycle, a nutrient life cycle. So yes, as monocultures are, as traditional farming is not in alignment with the needs of how soil is built and how soil is maintained. If you look at any farmed field, any tilled field or plowed field, you'll see that the soil is usually like this light brown color. It's because it's not healthy with nutrients of microorganisms. Whereas if you look at a really healthy garden or a forest system, if you dig down in the top 6 inches of topsoil, you'll find a dark black and usually quite fluffy soil when it's not compacted. So on a trail in a forest, you will not find this because people are walking all the time. You have to maybe go a little bit off the track. But there you will find it. Probably one of the best things you can do is to reduce chemical inputs. Our whole ecosystem is built from the bottom up, not top down. We will not survive 1 year without bees. And insects are disappearing at an alarming rate. Simple. This is because there are pesticides on plants which are not just killing maybe like one intended species, but have an effect on all of the insects in your natural surroundings. Looking at options and how we can reduce these chemical inputs. This is short-term vision versus long-term vision. I'm not saying I have the answers. I'm not an industrial farmer. But we can sure see what the effects are of chemicals in the environment. There is unfortunately a lot of control standards that are implemented by huge companies like Monsanto. And I guess another way to look at this is to work with your neighbors to say no, enough is enough, and that we need to switch the standards, switch the what are the moral values to farming. Total dominion over nature isn't working anymore. I mean, it lasted 200 years. That's the blink of an eye in terms of how long we've been here on Earth, how long life has been sustained on Earth. And when you walk through a field these days, the ecosphere of life is so much reduced to when I used to walk through fields when I was a child 20 years ago, So there's a baseline which we are really, really losing. I guess another thing would be understanding that that large mammals are not necessarily our enemies whatsoever, speaking to farmers, and that letting these animals exist in the ecosystem is really beneficial. Without these mammals, we won't have grazing herds, for example. So, we need predators, we need wild animals who are allowed to exist and interact with the land that we have stewardship over, rather than the idea of ownership. When it comes to forestry systems, or let's say tree production again. If there is some sort of orchard already there on your land, or you're thinking of taking over some land, taking stewardship of some land, diversify as much as possible. See what trees are growing well, what plants are growing well in the natural surroundings. Maybe go and visit a local eco project, see what's done well for them. Not to go to a local nursery and just buy whatever plants look good. But understand that there's certain trees that will do well down in the valley, as opposed to certain trees that will do well up on higher ground, because there's certain factors like frost that trees are very sensitive to, certain factors like wind that trees are very sensitive to, also sun, also different soil variations. All of these things really matter when understanding what trees do well in literally the tiniest changes in ecosystem. So to sum up the question of how can farmers transition from these traditional or post-industrial era farming practices and back to what we need to do to create strong ecosystems, strong resilient ecosystems, we need to essentially look at how indigenous practices were observing and interacting with the land. Go to your neighbors, learn from each other, create community that really is sharing and is vulnerable and is ready to listen to one another and is ready to open source information and share seeds. And I think a lot of it comes back to community. And listening to the wisdom of older generations, as well as pioneering younger folks. Excellent question. Probably one of my favorite questions. Personally, I feel that carbon sequestration is still quite two-dimensional, whereas looking at something like biodiversity impact and creating habitat is a much more multi-dimensional way of handling the situation that we're in. It's only that carbon sequestration is quite an easy way to measure things, very standardized, and quite simple to sell. And quite simple to understand. But I think the way that we need to shift to create more depth is to create biodiversity credits as opposed to carbon credits. First of all, you can plant trees in kind of monocultures under the guise of forestry, such as trees that will be cut down for timber in 30 to 50 years, and sell those as carbon credits. To me, that makes no sense. Also, not a great habitat for a diversity of species. There will be some animals that live within it, but yeah, not the best. It's not mimicking an old growth forest system, of which we only have about 3% of left in the world. And that means a lot when we're talking about it in a bioregional sense. Look at Europe and the forestry that you imagine around it now. When you see huge swaths of pine trees, in Portugal we have huge plantations of eucalyptus trees. It's still somewhat called forestry, but it's not a forest. The way that Europe used to be in this kind of temperate rainforest was something in between a rainforest and a savanna. Maybe something like what's behind me actually right now. Kind of like sprawling trees, but there's a meadow in between. Here we have maybe an overdominance of cork oak on the land, but we're slowly introducing more species, stratified by digging swales and creating water retention so that trees can be afforded to grow. Diverse systems will create more space for carbon to be stored in the soil because different plants have different stratifications in their roots. So as much as what you can see above the ground, you also see root systems below the ground that have different stratifications as well. Therefore, there's more space for carbon to be stored. Second is that we're creating habitats for biodiversity. You're creating a habitat for healthy soil. So I don't know the exact stats, but let's say that 1 square meter of healthy soil can hold 100 times more carbon than unhealthy soil, which you might get if you just clear cut a pine forest and then replant it again. Because one, you're destroying a lot of the micronutrients and a lot of the mycelium system by clear cutting. And then you're putting the same plants in and you're suppressing the other trees that might be able to grow around it. For example, the oaks, the birches, all of the brambles, all of the vines, a lot of the grasses. You're going with some sort of machine and cutting it all back and making sure that one species is prioritized. I've been in this industry and I don't feel comfortable in it. And so yes, it makes a lot of sense that we're ensuring that there's a healthy cycle of planting diverse species and then managing them correctly, not prioritizing one species for cash, but we are managing the species in a way that is consistently creating successive habitats for other plants, for flowers, wildflowers, all of these kind of different small habitats between the grasses and in the stratifications of the trees that are creating nests and homes for small mammals and birds. Think of a David Attenborough documentary. He's talking about like how, on the forest floor, there's these guys, the jaguars or the capybara, and then a little bit, 20 meters above, you have the monkeys and some geckos and some small frogs. And then another 30 meters up, there's 10 other species of more monkeys, more birds, more frogs. All of these micro ecosystems that are created. Okay, coming back to diversity and stability. When we could introduce biodiversity credits, there's a whole world out there that can be understood as an interactive, interconnected, and interdependent ecosystem that should be allowed to thrive and has each an integral part to play with the next. Whether that's being food for the next species, or providing seeds that drop to whatever level for the next species to feed on. And then that species poops out that nutrients, and it goes into the next species. It goes into the soil. It goes into maybe some little pockets of parts of trees, and animals live on this. Other plants live on this. There's a whole massive world out there that is just beyond this kind of two-dimensional way of measuring carbon, which is by looking at the size of trees. One book that really influenced me was a book that's deeply based in Indigenous wisdom called Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. If we are not giving back and having a respect to the land, to actually creating a relationship that's based on mutual understanding, we're kind of doomed to fail from the beginning. For example, as we've seen in the Great Depression in the US, where the land was so overfarmed that it just became this crazy, crazy dust bowl and nothing could grow for some decades. Settlers were encouraged to just shoot dead all of the buffalo, get rid of all of the species, cut down all of these trees, and it created an ecological desert, which some 50 to 60 years later then just became absolute ecological poverty, and therefore led to economic poverty. So let's look at like the indigenous American practices that were in deep reverence with the land. When you're taking, there is some sort of giving back, whether that's in the planting phase or the harvesting food to plate phase. There's always something that's in exchange. And I think this is being recognized more and more due to books like Braiding Sweetgrass, and understanding that there is a great interdependence and ecosphere that we are part of. So I think that people then are looking to organize within communities, as Indigenous cultures generally do, to share resources, to understand that, we cannot dominate a land, or we cannot necessarily tend and look after or steward a land that's a huge ranch in the kind of economic model that capitalism is tied into. So there's a lot to be said for this, and I think that because of this, we're scaling back down to bioregional systems where we don't want to have to import things from far away or export goods very far away, because it just doesn't make sense. So I think here in Portugal, we are massively privileged and maybe almost living in this society that is a little bit ahead of its time. But I hope that this is rippling out to also the rest of the world, or at least the rest of Europe. So yeah, these are creating in commons-based models, models like cooperatives, community-supported agriculture, alliances, and that are more resilient and effective under stress that we might be facing in the future. Having a relationship with the land restores ecological literacy. That means being able to observe how plants are creating signs of the health of the soil, of the water cycles, and basically understanding that there is a language there. It's just not through words, but there is a language that can be interacted with. There is a beautiful relationship with land that can be cultivated through giving time and space for nature to speak in its own way. I do want to read a quote out from Robin Wall Kimmerer. In the garden, you can't hide. The soil reveals your failures and triumphs. It's a place where deep reciprocity between people and the earth can be enacted every day. I think that agroforestry is an amazing threshold into understanding human relationship with land, but it's not the be-all and end-all. I see that there's many other systems which we can work with, and I think it's a great teacher, as permaculture is also an amazing set of guidelines. Your agroforestry system is, a point of contact that will translate a lot more stories that are out there in the wider natural world. If we're not farming land in a way that we're cutting back huge hundreds of hectares of crops and regrowing them, then how are we managing it? Well, before there was wild herds, and they had natural predators, and they would be the ones kind of taking care of the land. And humans followed those. And at this point in time, I don't think there's not a way of going back to this. However, we can manage land with animals that are grazing herds, that we have rotationally moving around hundreds of hectares that may be managed. So it's not necessarily a bad thing to keep animals. It's just the way that we manage and interact with the land that we have under our care, and giving them a chance to be cared for and having a good life around them. And sure, why not give them some fruit trees in the fields that they graze that they can also eat?